My immortality was an accident, an unintended side effect of an unexpected ascension. Birth is always messy, bloody, and rarely goes as expected, more so with gods. From my vantage point, I can see many things that others are incapable of seeing. I can see patterns and interactions that would mystify the uninitiated, that would capsize whole theologies and shatter the worldviews of philosophers and physicists. It is a common misconception that we forge our own destinies. In truth, destiny is the interaction of hundreds of variables, thousands of interactions, millions of collisions. No one being can control destiny. But there are times when similarities and differences become significant, when coincidence and concurrence conspire to create a certain significance, to create a moment that can be manipulated by those initiated in the ways of power. This takes courage and knowledge, insight and resolve, and power. Above all, power. Worlds can be moved and manipulated. Manipulation and motion can impact and change other worlds. When worlds come together, the potential for sweeping change, for revolution, redemption, rebirth, becomes a reality. When worlds collide, power determines who rises and who falls, who lives and who dies, who ascends and who is left behind. From my vantage point, I see two such worlds entering a time of significance. One world, blasted, devastated at the hands of the Wrathborn Empire, a place of plague and progress halted. A place in decline, entwined in a death kiss with dark forces. A place where only the powerful survive, and the world has been whittled down to only two groups, the destroyers and the survivors. Another world, at the height of its greatness. A place of peace finally emerging after a century of war. A place where the finest warriors that world had ever known bend knee willingly to the Silverfire King, the herald of a new world order. A place that recognizes and celebrates the power and prowess of their victors, and that calls them, rightly, champions.
Who he was before is lost to history. Some say he was a peasant child, others insist he was the child of nobility. Regardless, they know that he was born out of loss and rage, that he was twisted by death's touch early in his life, that life itself was his enemy.
The Ebon Order was a vast presence across the world, whispering secrets into the ears of kings and hierophants. They were so well ensconced in the halls of power and privilege that by the time most people knew that the Great War had begun, the leadership of most nations had already fallen.
Where the power came from no one knows, but he cloaked himself with wrath and power and defied the natural order, pulling forth the dead from their graves to serve him.
With the armies in disarray, no place was safe. When the Ebon Order's conscripts and abominations started hunting in the night, people were faced with a terrifying choice: run or die.
It started small at first. A single traveler on the road fell to him, to the monsters in the darkness, then caravans, then towns, then cities. Something terrible had been loosed on the world.
Something terrible had been loosed on the world. Cities fell, towns fell. Caravans of refugees gathered together for mutual protection, fleeing the darkness. But then one man stood and fought. It started small at first.
As the ranks of his forces swelled, he declared himself the architect of an empire born of wrath. History would remember him as the most prolific killer ever known, and if one needed proof of the sheer number of his victims, one need only look at the legions at his command.
He called himself the Silverfire Knight, Corbin Durandal, and he held a flaming sword up in the darkest part of the night. He fought the encroaching darkness, and inspired an army of champions to take up arms and fight with him.
The empire was not unopposed. The city-state of Cordia, the enclave of Desdemar, the Clockwork Citadels, the most powerful city-states and the best-trained armies arrayed themselves against the Emperor's war machine.
Those who lived established orders to empower and enhance their greatest warriors. Men and women who, through training, insight, or faith, were able to tap into powers beyond those available to the common man. They became the shock troops of the Great War. They became champions of unique power, wielding magic, blade, and faith with deadly effect.
It was a slaughter. The cultured city-state of Cordia enslaved. The enclave of Desdemar put to the torch. The flying clockwork citadels of the builder sent crashing to the earth. the land itself wasting away, the very air heavy with the plague of the Wrathborn. Nature itself has been dealt a mortal wound, yet some survived.
The army of champions, led by the Silver Fire Knight, forced the Ebon Order and its abominations back. The forces of darkness made their last stand on a remote hill, besieged on all sides. Their greatest abomination reared its twisted head and was struck low. For the first time in a generation, there was peace.
The Emperor stood victorious, crushing the last shreds of civilization under his boot. The only ones who survive are those who have bent knee and sworn fealty to the Emperor, those who exist in hiding, or those who have found the power to fight and resist, to survive. Small communities of survivors exist, hidden away in the lost corners of the world, trading shreds of information or supplies across vast plague lands patrolled by the undead of the Wrathborn Empire. It was the beginning of a dark age.
The Silver Fire Knight named himself High King of the newly formed Silver Fire Kingdom, and his lieutenants were made barons. Tales of humanity's saviors echoed across the land, and people emerged from hiding to start life again. The orders that had been established during the war became the guides and protectors of a new society under the rule of the Silver Fire King. It was the beginning of a new world order.
Through determination, strength, or guile, you have survived where others have perished. You have evaded the bulk of the Wrathborn Empire and have fled from safehold to safehold across the face of the blasted world you called home. Through dedicated study, infused magic power, or alignment with powerful beings, you have amassed enough power to live. You are a survivor.
You battled a force of darkness and destruction that had subjugated nations. You beheld atrocities of flesh and violence, and stood strong against them. You battled legions of inhuman abominations and their hooded keepers, fighting to keep the light from fading from the world. You are a champion.
They will meet, champions and survivors. Their worlds will brush by each other, despite the fact that neither knows the other exists. Decisions will resonate, interactions will be influenced, and collisions will shake the foundations of world. Who will have the knowledge to influence the destiny of two worlds? Who will have the power to inflict their will upon reality? Who will ascend? Survivors, who have wrapped themselves in power to survive? Survivors who have sought out beings or places or objects of power in order to stave off the Empire? Who have scratched, bit and fought, manipulated and sacrificed in order to live? Champions, who came into their power fighting against the darkness. Heroes who have honed their skill on the battlefield, whose resolve and strength have been forged in the flames of war, who have perfected the art of battle and killing and emerged victorious. And whom will you stand shoulder to shoulder next to?